Two security guards step in front of 81-year-old Thomas Williams as he walks toward his son's graduation ceremony. "You don't belong here," one guard says, blocking his path. "This is a private event." The quiet black man in the worn suit doesn't argue, but what these guards don't know is that he's a decorated Marine who fought in 3 tours of Vietnam, and the 6 Navy SEALs sitting in the back row are about to teach them a lesson they'll never forget. Thomas Williams stood outside the grand doors of the Riverside Military Academy, adjusting his old navy blue suit that had seen better days. At 81, his back was still straight, and his greying hair was cut neat and short. Deep lines marked his dark face, each one telling a story of battles fought and hardships faced. The academy building rose before him like a castle, all red, brick and white columns. Inside, his son Marcus was about to graduate as a second lieutenant, the first Williams to become an officer. Thomas had driven 4 hours from his small apartment in Detroit, his old Honda making strange noises the whole way. He carried a small camera in his jacket pocket and wore his only good shoes, polished until they shined. The invitation in his hand was wrinkled from being folded and unfolded so many times. He had read it dozens of times, making sure he had the right date, the right time, the right place. This was the proudest day of his life, and nothing was going to keep him from seeing his boy become an officer. Thomas had joined the Marines in 1961, straight out of high school in Alabama. Back then, black Marines faced things that white Marines never had to think about. Different barracks, different mess halls, different treatment. But Thomas kept his head up and did his job better than anyone else. Vietnam came calling 3 times. 3 tours of hell in the jungle, carrying wounded Marines to safety, holding the line when everything fell apart. He earned 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star, though he never talked much about what he did to get them. The nightmares were enough to remember by. After the war, he came home to a country that didn't want to hear about Vietnam. He got a job at the Ford plant, married his sweetheart Sarah, and raised 3 kids on factory wages. Marcus was the youngest, the one who always asked about his daddy's war stories, the one who wanted to serve his country just like his old man. Sarah passed 5 years ago, cancer taking her slow and mean. Marcus had been there through it all, helping his father through the worst days of his life. When Marcus got accepted to the military academy, Thomas felt proud enough to burst. His boy was going to be an officer, something Thomas never dreamed possible back in his day. This graduation meant everything. It meant his sacrifices had been worth something. Thomas approached the main entrance, where families were streaming through the doors, dressed in their finest clothes. He joined the line, his invitation ready, his heart beating fast with excitement. He could hear the band practicing inside, could smell the flowers that decorated the lobby. That's when the 2 security guards noticed him. The first guard was young and bulky, with short blonde hair and mean eyes. The second was older, but just as unfriendly, with a permanent scowl on his face. They looked at Thomas like he was carrying a disease, their eyes taking in his old suit, his worn shoes, his dark skin. The younger guard stepped forward and blocked Thomas's path. "Sir, you need to leave," he said in a voice loud enough for other families to hear. "This is a private event." Thomas looked confused and pulled out his invitation. "I'm here for the graduation," he said quietly. "My son Marcus Williams is graduating today." The older guard snatched the invitation from Thomas's hands and barely looked at it before handing it back. "This doesn't look right," he said, with a shake of his head. "These invitations are supposed to be on special paper. This looks like a copy." Other families stopped to watch the scene. Some looked embarrassed, others just stared. A few parents pulled their children closer, as if Thomas was dangerous just by being there. "But it's real," Thomas said, his voice still calm and respectful. "You can call the office. Marcus Williams, graduating class of 2024. The guards weren't listening. The younger one grabbed Thomas by the elbow. "Look, old man, we don't want any trouble here. These families paid good money for this ceremony. don't want to be bothered by people who don't belong. Thomas felt the familiar burn of shame and anger in his chest, the same feeling he had carried through decades of being treated like he didn't matter. But this was different. This was his son's day, and he had every right to be there. "I'm not leaving," Thomas said quietly. "My son is graduating today, and I'm going to watch him become an officer." The guards looked at each other and smiled like they had just heard a good joke. "We'll see about that," the older one said. Thomas stood there with dozens of eyes on him, feeling smaller than he had in years. The shame burned hot in his chest, the same feeling he remembered from Jim Crow, Alabama, from separate water fountains and back of the bus seats. He thought those days were behind him. But here they were again, dressed up in security uniforms and fake politeness. His hands shook as he folded the invitation and put it back in his pocket. He thought about Sarah, about how she always told him to keep his dignity no matter what people said or did. He thought about Marcus inside that building, probably checking his watch and wondering where his father was. The other families were pretending not to watch now, but Thomas could feel their stares like physical weight. Some looked sorry for him. Others looked relieved that the guards were handling the situation. A few parents whispered to their children, probably explaining why some people didn't belong in nice places. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment and was back in the jungle, carrying Private Johnson to the medic tent while bullets whistled overhead. Johnson was white, from Mississippi, and had called Thomas terrible names during training. But when the shooting started, none of that mattered. Thomas carried him 2 miles through enemy fire because that's what Marines do for each other. He opened his eyes and looked at the guards again. He had faced down enemy soldiers and watched good men die. He had worked double shifts for 30 years to put his kids through school. He had buried his wife and kept going when everything felt hopeless. These 2 guards in their cheap uniforms weren't going to stop him from watching his son graduate. The younger guard was pulling out his radio when something changed in the lobby. 6 men in dress blue uniforms walked through the entrance, their presence immediately commanding attention. They moved with the quiet confidence of warriors, their uniforms perfect, their bearing unmistakable. Navy SEALs. The leader was a black man about 40 years old, with steel in his eyes and ribbons on his chest that told stories of battles in distant lands. The others were a mix of races and ages, but they all had the same look. Men who had seen combat and lived to tell about it. They took in the scene quickly, the way trained soldiers do. 2 guards harassing an elderly black man while families watched and did nothing, the kind of situation that made their blood boil. The older guard noticed them first and straightened up, suddenly aware that real military men were watching his performance. The younger guard was still focused on Thomas, still trying to intimidate an old man who had faced things these guards couldn't imagine. "Sir," the lead SEAL said to Thomas, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Is there a problem here?" Thomas looked up at the tall SEAL and felt something shift inside him. Here was a warrior, someone who would understand. "These guards are saying I can't come to my son's graduation," Thomas said simply. The SEAL looked at Thomas's invitation, then at the guards. His expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "What's the problem with his invitation?" he asked the guards. The younger guard tried to maintain his tough act. "Look, we don't want any trouble. This is a private ceremony for families only." "And this man isn't family?" the SEAL asked, his voice getting quieter and more deadly. Other families had stopped talking and were watching now. The lobby was getting tense, like the air before a storm. The guards were starting to realize they might have picked the wrong fight. The lead SEAL stepped closer to the guards, and his 5 teammates spread out behind him like they were setting up for a mission. The guards suddenly looked very small and very young. "Let me explain something to you," the SEAL said, his voice carrying across the now silent lobby. "This man is Thomas Williams, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. 3 tours in Vietnam, Silver Star recipient. 2 Purple Hearts." Thomas straightened up, surprised that this stranger knew his service record. The SEAL continued, his eyes never leaving the guards' faces. While you were probably playing video games and living in your parents' basement, this Marine was carrying wounded soldiers through enemy fire. While you were complaining about your easy jobs, he was working factory shifts to raise his kids and serve his community. The other 5 SEALs moved closer, their presence filling the lobby like a force of nature. Families who had been watching the harassment with discomfort now looked ashamed. Some began to clap slowly, others nodded in respect. "So let me ask you again," the lead SEAL said, his voice now carrying the full weight of military authority. "What exactly is the problem with this Marine attending his son's graduation?" The younger guard's face had gone pale. He looked around the lobby, hoping for support, but found only hostile stares from people who now saw him for what he really was. The older guard was backing away, suddenly very interested in his shoes. "There's no problem," the younger guard mumbled. "I'm sorry, what was that?" the SEAL asked. "I didn't hear you clearly." "There's no problem, sir," the guard said louder, his voice cracking slightly. "He can go in." The SEAL turned to Thomas and extended his hand. "Gunnery Sergeant Williams, it would be an honor to escort you to your son's graduation." Thomas shook the man's hand, feeling the strength and respect in that grip. For the first time in years, he felt like the Marine he had always been inside. The play. 7 military men walked into the graduation ceremony together, Thomas in the middle like he was being escorted by an honor guard. The other families followed behind them, many stopping to shake Thomas's hand and thank him for his service. Parents who had watched the guards harass him now looked embarrassed and apologetic. The lead SEAL, who introduced himself as Master Chief, Rodriguez, made sure Thomas got a front row seat. "We take care of our own," he said simply. "Marines, SEALs, it doesn't matter. We're all brothers." When Marcus Williams walked across that stage to receive his commission, Thomas was there in the front row, tears streaming down his face. His son spotted him immediately and broke into the biggest smile Thomas had ever seen. The young man's salute was sharp and proud, directed straight at his father. After the ceremony, Marcus rushed over to hug his father. "Dad, I was so worried. When you weren't here at the start," he said. "What happened?" Before Thomas could answer, Master Chief Rodriguez appeared beside them. "Your father just reminded some people about respect and honor," he told Marcus. "You should be proud. The Corps raised him right, and he raised you right." The 6 SEALs stayed for pictures and congratulations, treating Thomas like the war hero he was. Other families approached throughout the afternoon, wanting to meet the Marine who had served their country with such distinction. The 2 security guards were nowhere to be seen. Word spread quickly through the academy staff about what had happened, and by evening, both guards had been fired. The academy commandant personally apologized to Thomas and Marcus, promising that such treatment would never happen again. As Thomas drove home that night, Marcus's commission certificate carefully placed on the passenger seat, he thought about Sarah. She would have loved this day, would have been proud of how their son had turned out, would have laughed at how 6 Navy SEALs had become his personal bodyguards. Thomas kept that graduation photo on his kitchen table, the one showing him surrounded by 6 Navy SEALs and his newly commissioned son. Whenever he looked at it, he remembered that respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn through a lifetime of service and sacrifice. The story spread through social media and military networks, becoming a reminder that heroes come in all colors and ages. The SEALs who had stood up for Thomas received messages from around the world, thanking them for defending an old Marine's dignity. But they all said the same thing. They were just doing what any decent person should. DeMarcus went on to serve with distinction, carrying forward the values his father had taught him. He never forgot the lesson of that graduation day. That true strength comes from standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves, and that honor recognizes honor, regardless of the uniform it wears. Thomas lived 4 more years, long, enough to see Marcus promoted to captain, long enough to walk his granddaughter down the aisle at her wedding. When he passed peacefully in his sleep, 6 Navy SEALs served as honor guards at his funeral, a final salute to a Marine who had taught them all something about courage. The real victory that day wasn't about embarrassing 2 ignorant guards. It was about proving that in America, when good people witness injustice, they have the power to make it right.